What if I told you that decluttering isn't always about making space, it's about making peace, but not the kind you think? For many of us over 60, clutter isn't just a pile of things, it's the history of our lives stacked on shelves, tucked in drawers, and stored in boxes we haven't opened in years. And here's the part no one talks about. It's not always the keeping that's the problem, it's the guilt we feel when we think about letting go. Maybe you've held onto a set of dishes because your mother gave them to you, even though they've been gathering dust for decades. Or maybe it's a closet full of coats you no longer wear, but the thought of dropping them in a donation bin feels almost disrespectful. If you've ever paused with something in your hands and thought, throwing this away feels wrong, you're not alone. This isn't about being careless or wasteful, it's about finding a way to honor the things you've kept while still creating a home that works for your life now. And over the next few minutes, you'll see exactly how to let go in a way that leaves you feeling lighter, prouder, and more connected to the people and causes you care about. Because when done right, decluttering can be one of the most generous acts you'll ever make. Marcelline Gray was 72, living in a small brick house just outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. From the outside, her home looked like something out of a postcard. Flower boxes under the windows, a rocking chair on the porch. But step inside, and you'd find stacks of neatly folded fabric in every color imaginable, taking up entire closets, covering shelves, even tucked under her bed. Marcelline wasn't a hoarder. She was a quilt maker. For more than 40 years, she had collected fabric scraps from projects big and small, wedding quilts for nieces, baby blankets for neighbors, intricate wall hangings for county fairs. Every leftover piece, no matter how small, went into a carefully labeled bin. Not because she needed them right away, but because someday she might. Her someday mindset wasn't born from laziness or indecision. It was shaped by the era she grew up in. Raised during the late 1950s and early 1960s in a working-class family, she was taught that throwing away anything useful was almost a moral failing. Back then, people mended socks, reused glass jars, and saved buttons from worn-out shirts. Waste wasn't just frowned upon, it was a sign you didn't appreciate what you had. So when the quilting project slowed in her 70s, the scraps stayed. Piles of calico, flannel, and velvet. Some pieces so small they could barely make a coaster, sat untouched, preserved like treasures. She told herself, fabric this pretty shouldn't end up in the trash, even though she hadn't touched many of them in decades. Here's the part that might surprise you. Marcelline's clutter wasn't the result of shopping sprees or an impulse to accumulate more. It was the byproduct of saving things too carefully. And for her, every scrap represented possibility. Letting go felt like closing the door on a project that might one day be finished, a gift that might one day be given, or a memory that might one day be sewn into something meaningful. But what Marcelline didn't realize yet was that holding on to everything wasn't preserving her legacy, it was quietly burying it under layers of fabric no one else knew how to use. And that's where her story takes a turn. For many seniors, clutter isn't just about too much stuff. It's about deeply ingrained values, values formed in a time when wasting anything felt almost shameful. If you grew up in the post-war years, you probably remember the constant reminders from parents or grandparents, "Don't throw that away, it could be useful." Those words weren't just advice, they were a survival strategy. In the United States, especially in the decades following World War II, the idea of stewardship, taking care of what you owned and making it last, wasn't optional. People patched their clothes instead of buying new ones, repainted furniture rather than replacing it, and stored leftovers until the very last bite was gone. This mindset was passed down like an heirloom. And for many over 60 today, it's still guiding daily decisions, even in a world that looks completely different. That's why decluttering can feel so wasteful. When you look at an item, whether it's an extra set of coffee mugs, a drawer full of rubber bands, or a perfectly good toaster you haven't touched in years, you don't just see things. You see the possibility they hold, the money they represent, and the belief that tossing them out is almost irresponsible. Take something as simple as old electronics. How many of us have a corded landline phone tucked away in a closet, or a VHS player just in case? For years, Marcelline kept a dusty old sewing machine motor, certain that one day she'd find someone to repair it. And she's not alone. Many seniors keep these items because maybe they'll be useful again, even though technology has moved on and recycling programs now exist to handle them responsibly. Here's the challenge. Holding onto these things might feel like we're honoring our past values, but in reality, they often become burdens, physically and emotionally. They take up space in our homes and in our minds, making it harder to enjoy the things we truly use and love. So before you tuck something away just in case, pause and ask, is keeping this item a true act of stewardship, or is it simply postponing a decision I already know I need to make? Do you still keep things because you might use them one day? Tell me in the comments. For seniors who grew up in a time when waste was nearly a sin, decluttering can feel like walking a tightrope between responsibility and betrayal. It's not that you don't want the space, you do. But you also want to be sure that whatever leaves your home still holds purpose for someone else. That's what I call wise stewardship, the art of letting go without guilt, in a way that aligns with your lifelong values of care, thrift, and usefulness. Wise stewardship isn't about rushing to fill trash bags. It's about finding the right place for each item so that instead of feeling like you're discarding part of your history, you're releasing it into a new chapter. Here are 3 powerful ways to make that shift, methods that work especially well for seniors in the United States who want to downsize without losing the sense of integrity they've lived by for decades. 1. Donation with impact, knowing exactly where your items will go. The most powerful way to erase clutter guilt isn't simply to get rid of things, it's to send them somewhere you know they'll be valued. Dropping off a bag at a generic thrift store can leave you wondering, will my items be sold? Will they end up in a landfill? Or be shipped overseas, never used at all? That uncertainty is what keeps so many seniors holding on. But when you donate through specific programs with a clear mission, you gain something far more important than empty space, you gain peace of mind. Across the United States, there are countless opportunities to match what you have with where it's needed most. Veteran thrift programs use proceeds from donated goods to fund life-changing resources, job training, housing assistance, and mental health support for former service members. Senior center craft groups welcome supplies like fabric, yarn, and art materials, turning them into handmade blankets, hats, or greeting cards for community projects. Women's shelters accept kitchenware, bedding, and baby supplies to help families start fresh with dignity and comfort. For Marcelline, this shift in thinking changed everything. She had been saving boxes of fabric scraps for decades, unsure how to let them go without feeling like she was wasting something. Then she discovered a local volunteer quilting group that made blankets for foster children. In their hands, her forgotten scraps became bright, warm covers for kids who often arrived at new homes with nothing but a small bag of belongings. That's when she realized her things didn't have to sit in a closet to have value. They could be out in the world, meeting needs and bringing comfort right now. And that understanding made letting go not just easier, but deeply fulfilling. 2. Upcycling locally, partnering with community repair cafes or school art programs. If throwing something away feels like a betrayal of your values, the answer may not be to discard it, but to reimagine it. That's where upcycling comes in, and local communities across the United States are making it easier than ever. Repair cafes, often held in libraries, community centers, or church halls, are run by volunteers who love to fix things. They'll repair broken toasters, rewire lamps, mend small appliances, and sharpen tools, keeping them out of landfills and in working condition. Many also host fix-it tables where you can learn simple repair skills yourself, turning the process into a shared experience rather than just a drop-off. Schools, especially those with vibrant art programs, are another overlooked gem. Teachers are often thrilled to receive donations of materials that would otherwise sit unused in your home: craft paper, fabric, buttons, frames, picture mats, beads, even unexpected items like old keys, corks, or bottle caps. What looks like clutter to you can become the spark of a creative project for a student. That half-used box of colored pencils you've been holding onto? In a child's hands, it becomes a landscape, a portrait, or the backdrop of a science fair display. For Marcelline, this was more than just an option, it was a revelation. She donated a bag of small, brightly patterned fabric scraps to a nearby middle school art class. A few weeks later, the teacher invited her to an open house. There, in the center of the gym, was a massive community quilt stitched from her pieces, each square sewn by a different student. Standing in that room, surrounded by laughter and creativity, she realized her clutter hadn't just been reused, it had been transformed into something meaningful, visible, and worth celebrating. That day, she left with a lighter home, a lighter heart, and the realization that sometimes, letting go is the first step to creating something entirely new. 3. Targeted gifting. Passing items directly to people who need them. Sometimes the quickest way to remove the sting of letting go is to place an item directly into the hands of someone who will use it tomorrow. There's something profoundly satisfying about seeing an object you've cared for continue its journey immediately, without sitting in a bin or waiting in storage. Across the United States, this kind of targeted gifting is easier than ever through church bulletins, neighborhood Facebook groups, and local buy-nothing communities, networks where people freely give and receive within their own neighborhoods. The beauty of this approach is the immediacy. You're not guessing whether your item will be appreciated, you're watching it find a home in real time. For Marcelline, the moment came one Sunday after church. She overheard a young mother sharing that she wished she could afford a sewing machine to make clothes for her children. Without a second thought, Marcelline went home, dusted off her extra machine, tested it to make sure it ran smoothly, and even included a bundle of fabric to get her started. When she handed it over later that week, the young woman's gratitude was overwhelming. She wasn't just receiving a sewing machine, she was receiving a tool for independence, creativity, and care for her family. For Marcelline, the exchange erased years of hesitation about parting with certain belongings. The joy of seeing her gift in use far outweighed the comfort of having it sit unused in her home. When you focus on where your items go rather than just the fact that they are leaving, you shift from feeling like you're losing something to recognizing that you're giving something meaningful. Targeted gifting transforms decluttering from a task into an act of generosity, a natural continuation of the care and stewardship you've practiced your whole life. And for Marcelline, adopting these steps was only the beginning. Because once she mastered this way of letting go, she began seeing every item in her home through a brand new lens. But the next step changed how Marcelline saw every item in her home, forever. 4 years, Marcelline's instinct had been to hold on, because in her mind, ownership meant responsibility. If she had something, it was her duty to keep it safe, ready, and in good condition just in case. But as she began practicing wise stewardship, something shifted. She started asking herself a simple but powerful question every time she touched an item. Will this bless someone else more than it's blessing me? At first, this question felt strange, almost like she was giving herself permission to let go. But the more she asked it, the more it became a filter that cut through the fog of indecision. She realized that so many things in her home were sitting unused, quietly aging, while someone out there could be putting them to work right now. This was the moment she moved from ownership pride to legacy pride. Ownership pride is about what you've collected, maintained, or protected. Legacy pride is about the impact those items can have once they leave your hands. It's a subtle but powerful shift, and for seniors, it changes decluttering from a loss into a gift. One morning, Marcelline decided to test her new mindset. She pulled out a box of soft pastel quilt scraps she'd been saving for years. They were beautiful, but she hadn't used them, and deep down, she knew she wouldn't. Instead of putting them back, she thought of her neighbor, Lila, a retired nurse who volunteered in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, at the local hospital. Marcelline walked across the street and handed the box to Lila. A week later, Lila invited her to see the blankets she'd made, tiny, delicate quilts stitched from Marcelline's scraps, now wrapped around premature babies fighting for life. Standing there in that hospital room, Marcelline felt something she hadn't expected: joy. Her fabric wasn't sitting in a bin anymore, it was keeping fragile newborns warm. That single moment cemented her mindset change. She realized that the greatest value of her possessions wasn't in owning them, it was in releasing them so they could serve someone else. The pride she once felt in saving things was replaced by a deeper pride in sharing things. And here's the truth, This shift doesn't just lighten your home, it lightens your heart. When you start thinking about how your things can be part of someone else's story, you stop feeling like you're losing and start feeling like you're contributing. So, the next time you pick up an item and hesitate, ask yourself Marcelline's question: will this bless someone else more than it's blessing me? You may find the answer makes your decision for you. If you knew your items would help someone in need, would it be easier to let go? Tell me in the comments. Not every item in our homes is fit for donation, gifting, or resale. Some are too worn, damaged, or outdated for anyone to take. Others, like old chemicals, broken electronics, or threadbare linens, are unsafe to give away. For many seniors, this is the category that triggers the most guilt. It's not that the items are useful, it's the discomfort of tossing something out after decades of being taught that waste is wrong. This is where responsible disposal becomes a game changer. By using eco-conscious programs now widely available across the United States, you can release these items without feeling like you're betraying the values you were raised with. The goal isn't to pretend they never existed, it's to give them the most responsible final chapter possible. 1. Textile recycling drop-off bins at Target and H&M. Old clothing is one of the most common forms of silent clutter in senior households. Not the outfits you still enjoy wearing, and not the special pieces you'd gladly donate, but the in-between items. These are the worn-out pajamas, the stained tablecloths, the curtains faded from years of sunlight, and the single socks that have lost their match. They are too ragged to give away, yet they still feel too good to simply throw in the garbage. The good news is, you don't have to choose between keeping them or sending them to the landfill. Many Target and H&M locations across the United States now offer textile recycling drop-off bins. These programs accept fabrics in any condition: holes, stains, missing buttons, fraying edges, it doesn't matter. The textiles are collected, shredded, and repurposed into entirely new products, such as carpet padding, insulation for buildings, or industrial cleaning cloths. For seniors who have held onto these items for years out of a sense of responsibility, this is a game changer. You're not discarding the material, you're giving it a second life in a form that still serves a purpose. When Marcelline learned about this, it was as though a weight had lifted. She had been keeping a laundry basket tucked in her spare room, filled with faded aprons, worn pillowcases, and old table runners she couldn't bring herself to toss. The idea of throwing them away had always felt wrong. But once she knew they could be recycled into something useful, the decision became easy. On her next grocery trip, she swung by Target, dropped the basket into the textile bin, and drove home feeling lighter, not just in her storage space, but in her mind. That day, she realized she hadn't gotten rid of anything. She had simply moved it along to its next chapter. 2. Municipal hazardous waste days for paint and chemicals. Decades spent in the same home often lead to decades of leftover supplies: half-used paint cans from old remodeling projects, rusted containers of gardening chemicals, bottles of harsh cleaning agents tucked under the sink, and other products you haven't touched in years. These aren't just taking up space. Many of them are unsafe to store indefinitely and can be dangerous if disposed of improperly. In fact, tossing them in the regular trash is not only hazardous, it's illegal in many states. Fortunately, most cities and counties across the United States now offer hazardous waste collection days specifically for residents to safely dispose of these materials. These events are run by trained professionals who follow strict environmental safety standards, ensuring that paints, solvents, pesticides, automotive fluids, and other hazardous substances are either neutralized, recycled, or disposed of without contaminating soil, water, or air. For seniors, this service eliminates the physical risk and the mental worry. You don't have to figure out what's safe, how to transport it, or whether you're breaking any rules. You simply bring the items, and the experts take care of the rest. Marcelline turned it into part of her yearly spring cleaning ritual. Once the weather warmed, she'd walk through her garage and basement shelves, pulling out the old bug spray, expired weed killer, and paint cans so dried out they rattled when she shook them. On collection day, she loaded the items into her trunk, drove to the designated drop-off site, and stayed in her car while workers unloaded everything for her. The whole process took less than 15 minutes, yet the relief lasted for months. No more cluttered shelves. No more wondering if something dangerous was leaking or deteriorating in her home. Just a clean, safe space, and the satisfaction of knowing she had handled it the right way. 3. Electronic recycling programs at Best Buy and Staples. Electronics clutter can quietly take over storage spaces, especially for seniors who have lived in the same home for decades. There's the corded landline phone you've kept just in case, the drawer full of tangled cables with no matching device, the printer that stopped working in 2009, and the VHS player that hasn't been plugged in since the early 2000s. These items aren't just outdated, they can also contain materials that are harmful to the environment if thrown in the trash. Thankfully, Best Buy and Staples operate nationwide electronic recycling programs designed to keep these devices out of landfills. They accept a wide variety of items, from laptops and monitors to small appliances and accessories. Some products are taken free of charge, while others, such as large TVs or certain monitors, may require a small recycling fee to cover processing costs. Once collected, the devices are dismantled, valuable metals like copper and gold are recovered, plastics are recycled, and hazardous components such as lead or mercury are safely contained and disposed of. For seniors, these programs offer both peace of mind and convenience. You don't have to worry about whether you're throwing away something dangerous or adding to landfill waste. You simply drop it off, knowing it will be handled responsibly. For Marcelline, discovering this option was a turning point. She had been holding onto a broken DVD player, the motor from an old sewing machine, and a grocery bag full of mystery cords she hadn't touched in years. Once she learned about the program, she boxed everything up and made a single trip to her local store. Watching the worker wheel her old electronics away didn't feel like loss, it felt like closure. And the best part was knowing those materials wouldn't be sitting in a dumpster, but instead would be given a second life in some new form. Big disposal projects can be overwhelming, so Marcelline started scheduling a monthly declutter date, one specific day dedicated to just one category. In January, she gathered worn textiles and dropped them at the Target recycling bin. February was for Hazardous Waste Day. March, she loaded the car with old electronics. By focusing on one type of clutter at a time, she avoided the physical and emotional burnout that comes with tackling everything at once. Over the course of a year, she cleared out years of lingering problem items without ever feeling rushed or guilty. Letting go doesn't always mean finding a new owner. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for an item, and for your home, is to make sure it's disposed of in a way that protects the planet and honors the values you've carried all your life. With these programs, even the things no one wants can still have a responsible, purposeful ending. Marcelline's home no longer felt like a place weighed down by decades of someday. The heavy stacks of fabric bins were gone from the hallway closet, freeing up space for a small reading nook where sunlight now poured in each morning. Shelves once crammed with sewing supplies she no longer used were neatly organized, holding only the tools and materials she truly loved. There was more room to move, less to dust, and an unexpected calm in knowing that every corner of her home now served her life as it was, not as it used to be. The change wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Without the silent burden of unused items, she found herself spending more time actually sewing again, choosing projects that brought her joy instead of feeling weighed down by the backlog of saved scraps. She noticed she walked more freely, her steps lighter, as if the air in her home had space to breathe. One Saturday, her neighbor invited her to a local school art fair. Marcelline wandered past rows of student projects, paintings, sculptures, handmade crafts, until she stopped in her tracks. There, hanging proudly on a display, were two bright patchwork quilts made from the very fabric scraps she had given away months earlier. She recognized the prints instantly, the soft blue floral from a baby blanket she'd made in the 80s, the cheerful yellow gingham from a picnic quilt she'd sewn for her sister. The moment hit her with unexpected warmth. These pieces of her past weren't sitting in a bin anymore. They were part of something living, vibrant, and useful. Children and parents stopped to admire the quilts, unaware of the history stitched into them. Marcelline didn't need to tell them. It was enough to know that those fabrics had found a second life and would continue to bring comfort and beauty. She realized then that letting go hadn't meant losing her things at all. It had meant multiplying their purpose. Instead of fading in storage, they were now part of new memories, in new hands, making a difference in ways she never could have imagined. She didn't lose her things, she multiplied their purpose. Decluttering after 60 isn't wasteful, it's one of the most meaningful ways to release the best of what you own into the world. Every item you've cared for, every possession you've saved, carries a piece of your story. But keeping them tucked away, unused and unseen, doesn't honor that story, it hides it. When you let go with intention, you're not erasing your past. You're extending its reach, allowing the things you value to live on in other homes, in other hands, and in other moments that matter. Think of it not as losing, but as giving. You've spent a lifetime building, creating, and preserving, and now you have the chance to send those gifts forward. The space you create in your home becomes space for living, moving, and breathing. The things you pass on become part of someone else's joy, comfort, or opportunity. If this helped you see your home differently, hit like, share it with a friend over 60, and subscribe, because your next chapter should feel lighter, freer, and filled with purpose.